because we've all been trained to think euthanasia all bad. But medically, there are different terms. There's active euthanasia and there's passive euthanasia. There's voluntary passive euthanasia and there is active euthanasia. So let's explain some of these terms. The first one being voluntary passive euthanasia. Kirby Anderson defines this one as, this form of euthanasia assumes that a medical personnel at the patient's request will merely allow nature to take its course. The physician did nothing to hasten death. All right? There's nothing biblically wrong with that. That's voluntary passive euthanasia. The person has said, look, when I get older, I don't want any great measures taken to save my life. Let nature take its course. We're doing nothing to hasten it. We're doing nothing to cause it. We let nature take its course. When I become bedridden and I can't move and I'm clearly going to die in a few more months, why do something extraordinary to keep me around? Don't kill me. Don't do active euthanasia, but voluntary passive euthanasia. The person has voluntarily said, this is what I want done. Okay, that's not wrong. That's voluntary passive euthanasia. Then there's voluntary active euthanasia. This means that the physician, by request, hastens death by taking some active means, like a lethal injection. That is wrong. That is a sin. That is murder. Voluntary active euthanasia. And then there's involuntary passive euthanasia. This assumes that the patient has not expressed a willingness to die or cannot do so. The medical personnel do not go to any extraordinary measure to save the patient, and often without food by removing the feeding tubes, antibiotics, or life support systems like respirators. In this case, the person dies. In other words, this was, again, the involuntary passive euthanasia. The other one was voluntary. They say, here's what I want to happen. This is where someone did not do anything. They didn't write anything out. They didn't leave in their will. They didn't write it down. And the family makes the decision. The family says, okay, here's what we want you to do. Let nature take its course. Don't do anything extraordinary. Okay, this again is involuntary passive euthanasia. Notice the key words here, passive and active. The active obviously is the bad kind. That's the murder. Then there's the involuntary active euthanasia. In this case, the physician does something active to hasten death, regardless of the patient's wishes, for humanitarian reasons, economic considerations, or genetic justifications. Now see, that's what my friend's mother had done to her, involuntary active euthanasia. That's not what she wanted. In fact, my friend told me the other night that his mother often will turn to him and say to him when he's at her retirement home watching the Minnesota Twins on television, she will often remind him that if it wasn't for the action he took, she would not be there right now. He told me the other night, she often reminds me and thanks me for what I did. See, that was involuntary active euthanasia that doctor was planning. Has this been done in other countries? Yes. The Dutch experiment is certainly instructive for us. A survey of Dutch physicians was made in 1990 by this committee, the Rimlet Committee. They found that 1,030 patients were killed without their consent. Of these, 140 were fully mentally competent and 110 were only slightly mentally impaired. But folks, we understand this is now going against the Hippocratic oath of a doctor, do no harm. We now are putting our doctors in the position of choosing to do harm to actually commit murder. Do you know there are countries in this world of ours where active euthanasia is so common that older people are scared to death to check into the hospital because they fear they will be euthanized without their permission, and in many cases they are. Do you want to go to a hospital? Let me ask you this. You say, well, House, I'm a high school, college student. I don't have to worry about that. I'm not anywhere near 70 or 80. What happens if you're injured on the way home from this conference? What happens if you're in a serious car wreck, God forbid, and you're put on life support? You don't think that active euthanasia can happen to someone of any age? Because some doctor simply says, well, they're harmed too bad, they're hurt too bad, the damage is too great. How about your own parents? What if your parents are living in a state and it takes you a day or two to get there? What if my friend had not been living literally just up the street from his parents and was there? What if he'd been several states away and it took a day or two to get there? You think his mother still would have been alive? And when he arrived, what do you think the reason she died would have been? Well, she was old. She was old. The truth likely was she was going to be shot up with morphine, murdered. You would have no way to know. How many of you are aware of this issue and the biblical response to it as you think down the line for your family, your friends, your relatives, maybe even your parents one day, that you have to start making decisions? Are you ready to make decisions based on what the culture now says is acceptable, or what you know the Bible says is the way that we're to look at life and handle these social issues? The report also found that another 14,175, 1,701 of them were mentally competent, were denied medical treatment without their consent, and died. This is that study. Kirby Anderson went on to say, first, physician-assisted suicide would change the nature of the medical profession itself. Physicians would be cast in the role of killers rather than healers. The Hippocratic Oath was written to place the medical profession on the foundation of healing, not killing. For 2,400 years, patients have had the assurance that doctors have taken an oath to heal them, not kill them. This would change with legalized euthanasia. We now have that in 5 states here in January of 2015. He went on to say in his book, Moral Dilemmas, Kirby did, second, medical care would be affected. Physicians would begin to ration health care so that elderly and severely disabled patients would not be receiving the same quality of care as everyone else. Have any of you been watching the news and realize that's what's going on right now? That's what's going on right now. Have you been watching what's happening with the VA and with other hospitals and other people that are getting cancer and other things? And what used to be common, able to receive treatment is now becoming increasingly hard, and you're fighting with the insurance companies and Obamacare to get what would be normal standard treatment. And did you know that this whole process of rationed healthcare through Obamacare was written by people that agreed and were promoting the idea that your age of life would be divided by the cost of the medical care, and upon the age of your life and the cost of the medical care would be a formula that would determine whether you were allowed to receive treatment or not? Which means we have already had reports of people who have been diagnosed with such things as cancer, like breast cancer, and their success of treatment and being healed was high, but because of their age, they were denied basic treatment, which would have probably saved their life, and instead they were allowed to die because the cost of the treatment and their age equaled useless either. We had people that were running around before this was passed talking about death panels and how this will lead to death panels, and liberals in the media wanted to mock anyone that talked about the idea of death panels. And after the passage of the legislation, we now have liberal and policy makers admitting, indeed, that's what these are. Because, see, now they can admit what we all knew to be true beforehand because now it's law. You see, this isn't just about active euthanasia. This is now leading to the ability to say about your grandparents or your parents or your uncle or your aunt or one day you, we just won't give you treatment. We won't kill you. Indirectly we will, but we won't put any, juice in your veins. We just won't give you treatment, and then you'll die. And that's exactly where we're headed today in America. Why? Because we don't value life. Why do we value life? Because God is the creator of life. We are created in the image of God. God is the giver of life. We don't take it. Murder is wrong, not because the Bible simply says thou shalt not murder. Murder is wrong because the Bible says so as a reflection of God's character and nature. Again, it's not about legalistic do's and don'ts. It's about the character and nature of God. He goes on to write, legalizing euthanasia would result in less care for the dying rather than better care. Legalizing physician-assisted suicide would open the door to anyone wanting the right to kill themselves. Soon this would apply not only to voluntary euthanasia, but also to involuntary euthanasia, as various court precedents begin to broaden the application of the right to die to other groups in society, like the disabled or the clinically depressed. Did you know there's actually a doctor who teaches, I think, ethics out of one of the major Ivy League schools? I can't believe he teaches ethics. But he, for many years, was pushing the idea that parents should have the right, after 3 or 4 days of their child being born, in that period of time, they ought to have the right to decide whether that child is euthanized. Just randomly. You know, today we have many babies that are murdered simply because a test comes back that says they might have Down syndrome. You know the number of people that have had pressured upon them, the pressure to murder their unborn child because the test came back that their child has Down syndrome or might have Down syndrome, and those Christian parents have said, no, I'm sorry, we won't do that. That child is born and doesn't even have Down syndrome. How many of you in this room know that kind of report goes on? Raise your hand. Sure. By the way, do you notice how we don't see a lot of Down syndrome children anymore? Some of you younger people, again, haven't lived long enough maybe to know how common it was to see a Down syndrome child. Today, it's so uncommon. Adults who've lived long enough to know this, let's convince the high school and college students that there was a time when we did see more Down syndrome children than we do today. If you agree with that statement, raise your hand. Yeah, why don't we see them? They're being murdered. A nation that murders its children eventually murders itself. What does the Bible say about this? What are you going to say about this? Some of you are eventually going to be, listen to me, some of you are eventually going to be a deacon in a church or an elder. One day, I pray that some of you meet the qualifications biblically of a deacon and or an elder. And you're going to get a phone call in the middle of the night to come to the hospital. And you're going to be asked for godly counsel on what am I to do. My child was just in a tragic accident. What should I do? My parent was just in an accident, like my friend's parent. What would you have said to him? What if he didn't know? See, he already knew. But what if he didn't know? What if he says, I've never studied this. I have no idea. The doctor says this is what we should do. I don't know what to do. And you're the deacon. You're the elder. Maybe you're the associate pastor. Maybe you're the pastor. Or maybe you're not even a deacon or an elder. Maybe you're just a friend or a family member. And they respect you and they trust you and they don't know what to do and they call you and they ask you to come to the hospital and they look you in the eye and they say, I don't know what to do. What should I do? Would you know what to tell them? You see, that's why we need to, as Christians, have the answers for the issues of the day and say, okay, you know what? The Bible does speak to this. I'll tell you, not my opinion, but let me tell you what the Bible has to say. First of all, we know the Bible says, thou shalt not murder. But then when it comes to the issue of active euthanasia, I know you don't find it in your concordance, but it actually is there. Go to 2 Samuel chapter 1. 2 Samuel chapter 1. This is the report of Saul's death. Now it came to pass after the death of Saul, when David had returned